What we'll do is we'll go ahead and get started. And for those of you who haven't joined one of our webinars in the past, we do a Masterclass series. It's usually twice a month. When we're trying to pick different topics that we're hearing a lot from our customers, prospects, just what's going on in the industry. And then we try and bring in super smart people that are a lot smarter than Alex and myself, which good news is that's not hard. So we try and bring in other people who just like have our perspective. And one of our goals in all of these sessions is like, we want people to walk away with like actual tactical things they can go and do. So hopefully it's not just like too high level, you should do this. So that's one of the goals. If you have questions throughout, we'd vastly rather you kind of like raise your hand, drop something in the chat and we'll try and kind of answer anything. And we'll save a little bit of time kind of at the end of today's session to chat through questions as well. But like much rather this be a conversation. We got a whole host of stuff that we're going to walk through, but like you got something specific you want to chat about, let's go ahead and kind of chat through that. So with that preamble, we're going to go ahead and kind of jump in here. Melanie, Nicole, thanks for joining. Like I said, you got questions, don't hesitate to kind of reach out. Joanne, great to see you as well. So we are going to, and just a little context for everybody. As I mentioned, we've been doing a whole bunch of Masterclass series, but the last 3 that we've done have been specifically AI-powered, playbooks for marketing was 2 times ago, for sales was 1 time ago, and today is CS. So if you're at all interested, have questions about marketing or sales, go back and check it out. All these webinars are on our website, free to download, don't worry about it. Like I said, if you ever have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. So, all right, we're gonna jump in here. So as I mentioned, we always like to bring in different people who are vastly smarter than us. I've had the distinct pleasure of getting to work with our guest here today in the past. So Austin and I, one of the last companies I was at was a company called Conversity. He came in, helped lead the CS team, was, like I said, at one of the times we're like, damn, this guy's good. He knows what he's talking about. He's now the VP of Global Customer Success at Command Alcon. Austin, you want to give kind of a quick background intro about kind of like who you are and then little fun fact, and we'll then jump into kind of today's session.
Absolutely. And I don't know if I'm smarter than you or not, Reese, so we'll offline, but it's good to see you all. Thanks for hanging out for this hour in conversation. Hope you learned something. Hope we can collaborate. And honestly, I hope I learned something from you all just from the conversation as well. But my name is Austin Eanes. I lead our customer success team here at Command Alcon. I am based in Denver, Colorado, with my lovely family, my wife Bridget, and my 2 little kids, Quincy and Willa. I'm a proud father. I always tell people that's my first job and husband, but very active, cycle quite a bit, similar to Reese. But love everything about Colorado and very much excited to speak to you all today. I'm passionate about customer success. I tell people all the time, when done correctly, I think it's the nucleus of any software organization because you touch all aspects of the business. So excited to dive in and share some insights with you all today.
Cool. Well, we're very excited to have you here. I'm very kind of grateful that you took the time out of your day. So when Austin and I were kind of prepping for this, one of the things we want to do is before we kind of get into like specific like AI use cases, we want to kind of take a step back of like, hey, what's the process for actually stepping into AI? Because what's interesting is Austin and I were chatting about this when we were prepping for this. We're seeing this all the time here at Domestique. A lot of companies are getting this wrong and a lot of AI rollouts are kind of failing. And part of the reason is because we're not stepping into it correctly. So we have this kind of framework that we kind of created of like how to step into AI. And we're going to talk a little bit about each of these, and we'll definitely get to the super sexy stuff of like AI use cases here. So we'll definitely get into that, but we're going to talk a little bit about like how to do this to make sure it's done thoughtful. So we believe it's kind of this 4-step process of the go-to-market framework. This is making sure your strategy, the processes you have, the systems and the data you have a good foundation. And the reason being is otherwise you have just a bunch of kind of garbage in, coming garbage out if you layer on a bunch of like AI use cases. The customer journey, this is making sure you have a clearly documented customer journey, not only from an external standpoint, so what are all the steps your customer is going through, but equally as important, what are the internal steps? So thinking about it from a CS perspective, hey, you go to onboard a customer and you have a CSM or an AM. What are the steps they need to do? What do they need to know about the customer? What do they need to know about their problem, their personas there? What are the steps that need to happen? The more detailed you can do this documentation, particularly on the internal standpoint, when you then go to think about like AI, it'll give you a better ability to kind of lay AI use cases on top of it. The third step is kind of this AI prioritization, or what we're calling AI council. You're now seeing this concept show up more and more, is having some sort of cross-functional team sit down within an organization to say, hey, looking back at our customer journey, what are all the potential use cases we could AIify? What are we not going to do? What are we going to do? But instead of doing it with AI, we're going to do it with workflows, because there's an incremental cost associated with AI. So if you get the same outcome, you'd rather do it with workflows, so it's actually cheaper. And then what are you actually going to do with AI? And then when you do it, how do you thoughtfully roll it out so that Johnny rep and Susie rep aren't doing two totally different things, right? Having that thing so you're actually starting to see the efficiencies. And then finally is actually building the kind of AI use cases. So we're going to dive into each of these a little deeper, and we're going to get kind of Austin's opinion, but we're just setting kind of the framework here of how to kind of step into AI. So let's start with the first one, right? Step one of this kind of go-to-market framework. I know, Austin, when you and I were kind of chatting through this, we were chatting through like making sure you don't have a bunch of that garbage in. So one of the things we like to kind of think about whenever we're working with organizations, like, do you have a clear understanding of what you're trying to measure? Austin, I'm curious, when you look at CS organizations, like, and you came into Command Alcon or one of your other, at Zoom or Conversant where we work together, what was like one of the first things you looked at from like the KPIs? What's that clear list of like, what are you trying to measure so that, as you're thinking about that AI in the future, you have a clear understanding?
Some of the core measurements, and it sounds very, standard when you say this, but at the core, you look at net revenue retention, which encompasses growth from your base, as well as churn and downsell. So hyper focus on that as a metric, and it's one of the core measurements. In addition to that, there's a theme of customer health and general sentiment. Today at Command Alcon, we really leverage our net promoter score to help us keep a pulse on that. And then overall product utilization and adoption. So as customers purchase your solution, are they executing and finding value out of it? Based on what the experience is, based on the size of the customer and the segment they're in, are they utilizing and adopting the product correctly? I'll say those are like the four themes.
And what's interesting about that is like having to understand what you want to measure. The next kind of step in that is like, what is the definition of that, right? Because one of the classic mistakes we've seen is like, all right, you want to track net revenue retention. Was finance looking at it one way versus how you are looking at it? So like having a clear documentation. That I'm curious, as you think about like some of the, you talked about those four major metrics. As you think about like individual steps within your customer journey at Command Alcon, are you looking at kind of more micro level kind of KPIs of like, hey, we got a customer who's in onboarding. We want them to be onboarded within, 14 days, right? I'm making stuff like, what are the KPIs you're also looking at on kind of a step-by-step basis?
Yeah, so going through the customer life cycle from install all the way to renewal, there's multiple different touch points. And not just within CS, I think across all customer service related, segments. So in professional services, we have unique KPIs, some of which are a customer effort score that we measure. So what is a customer effort score to get a solution or software live and in production? When it comes to my team, we also measure not just relationship NPS, but product NPS. So within the 90 days mark, we do a net promoter score based on the product itself. And it's not just targeted to the champion or the economic buyer. It's rather targeted to all end users. So we do a pulse on end user sentiments based on the likelihood to recommend a product to a peer. And then we do likelihood to renew scores as well. And then ultimately, which turns up at the end is the NRR performance. So if customers are renewing and growing with us year over year, that's what we measure across the entire life cycle.
So as Austin's kind of highlighting here, like having a good understand what are you measuring, clear definitions on this kind of helps set the framework of like, oh, if we're having multiple definitions, let's get that aligned so that you have a clear understanding. So again, you've got that foundation set up well. So data cleanliness, right? I just kind of talked about this, and Austin, I know you and I touched on this kind of like briefly, like when you've come in as some of your other organizations, like where was the data level? And as you're like, hey, I want to be able to measure X. Oh, we can't measure right now because the cleanliness is garbage. Like, what are some of the activities you done to make sure you had clean enough data so that you can start making a data-driven or data-driven decisions within the CS organization?
Yeah, this is a big one, and to be honest, this is going to trigger into our conversation a bit. But at the core, before we make AI investments or tooling investments, you have to ensure your data is clean, it's useful, and hopefully it's going to help you guide the picture and outcomes you're seeking prior to in investing in the tool. So things like renewal dates, things like financials and overall ARR figures. Ensuring small things that sound silly, but do you have a customer champion and the right stakeholders identified in the customer profile and your CRM or Salesforce, whatever that is. So there's a lot of legwork in preparation for an investment in an AI tool that often may get overlooked if you're kind of rushing into a tool before understanding the data sets that are going to help drive the tool and the experience.
And I like, for everybody on the call right now, I know what this conversation right here is not sexy of like, oh, you're talking about like a data glossary. Like, I promise you what Austin is talking about, we've now seen this countless times. Like, you will not be able to roll out effective AI of like, I've seen this, 100 times in the last several months of like, hey, we got Claude and we asked Claude, hey, give this a summary of kind of like all upcoming renewal dates. But to Austin's point, if all of a sudden we don't have the structure to track the right renewal dates inside of our CRM, it's just going to return back a bunch of garbage. By the way, this what you see right here, the screenshot, this is a data glossary. We've got templates of this. If anybody wants a template, ping me afterwards, happy to provide that. So I know we talked a lot about step one. Step two is actually mapping that kind of customer journey, specifically the internal, right? A lot of people go through this exercise of the external, like, hey, what are all the stages the customer's going through? The bow tie, I think a lot of people have seen the bow tie, but equally as important for AI is understanding what are all the activities you want your customer to do. So Austin, I'm curious, whether Command Alcon, some of the other organizations, what's the process you've gone through? You come into an organization kind of new and you're kind of taking a look at it like, hey, we need to do this. How do you kind of sit down and kind of map, these are all the activities, hey, this is onboarding right here as an example. What are all the steps that we want to have happen within that? What do you do as you're kind of going through that process?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, my flavor may not be the right one for your organizations or company, but I always think about the outcomes. So as you look across the customer journey, start with the outcomes. What are the outcomes you're expecting the customer to achieve within that phase? So for example, for onboarding, we have a net promoter score coming out of onboarding. We want that to be a 9 or 10. Did we hit the mark? Are they happy? Are they finding value? If not, what do we need to do to get there? So what are the core outcomes per each chapter of your customer journey? And then define the activities that will help you achieve those outcomes over time.
And to Austin's point here that he's making, right? I think the more specific you can get, particularly within these activities, again, when you then finally get to stage 4 to actually building some of this kind of AI use cases that we're going to talk about here in a minute, the more specific you can make it, like it'll make your agents, your automations that much better. So like actually going through this, I think one of the classic misnomers here is people like, oh, this has got to be this 3-week long exercise. Now you can crank this out. This is actually an example of, we did this here internally at Domestique. We cranked this out in like 2 or 3 hours, right? And it may get you only 80% of the way there, but then I think to what Austin's talking about is like you continue to iterate on this over time. So, this is low-hanging fruit here. If you haven't gone through and done things like defining your life cycle stages, stage advancement criteria, all the stages post-sales, all that type of stuff, that is going to be foundational in order to be able to kind of do this. Again, this is an example of life cycle stages. Happy to provide kind of any of these templates. Austin, I assume most of the organizations have had this when you kept in, or if you had to do this kind of net new when you walked into an organization?
Both, actually. So I've worked at size companies as Command, and I previous to Command I worked at Zoom, and it depends kind of the army you have supporting your operations. At Zoom we had a large team of customer operations. Here, full transparency, a team of 2 people. So it's fun creating it, but it kind of depends on the size and maturity of your organization, right?
Yeah, and I think to the point you're making here, right? Like, crank out a V1, you can then iterate on as you start to kind of execute and see what's working over time. All right. So if you haven't kind of mapped out your customer journey, go and do that today. Now we're going to talk prioritization, right? We mentioned this concept of an AI council. If you don't have this, this should be a cross-functional group of leaders. It should not just be all your leaders. You got a BDR, an AM, a CSM who's really into kind of AI. Add them to the council. Like, you want those individuals who are driving this kind of AI. And then what you want to do is you want to come up with some sort of kind of like scoring methodology, right? So this is an example of it. You can see along the kind of x-axis, right? How frequent does this happen? How much time does this cost? How many team members within an organization? What's the impact to revenue? What's the total level of impact? The total level of impact is just kind of adding up those scores, and you can see we've got it just on a 1, 2, 3. But then what you do is you look at your customer journey. So all that mapping you just did, and pick out all the different use cases, right? So let's think about from a CS perspective. You got onboarding, right? In order to get onboarding, you got to set up the system. You got to train them on the system. You got to do all these types of things. And you go through and you do a scoring. And what you want to do is come away with like, all right, what is a high level of impact? And what's the relative effort level to actually kind of address this from, like, whether you're building AI use cases, workflows, whatever that type is. And you come up with an LOE, LOI, level of impact, level of effort. And the easy button is like high level of impact, low level of effort. You should do those things. The reverse, you probably want to kind of think about this. This should then inform how you're thinking about AI moving forward within an organization. Too oftentimes what we're seeing right now here is like the classic conversation I've been having the last couple of quarters is like, get on with the CEOs. Like, I just bought Claude and gave it to everybody. Now what, right? Susie's doing one thing, Johnny's doing another thing, all this type of stuff. Austin, whether at Alcon, Zoom, how have you, are you guys doing something like this? How are you all thinking about prioritization, particularly around kind of like AI specific use cases?
It's a great question. In all honesty, this would be an awesome tool as we think about investing in future technology, Reese. Here at Command Alcon, we have not done this level of detail yet, but it's going to be something I put in my toolkit moving forward. The way I've considered it is like, how can I give the CS and adoption team time back in their days to do more with customers? And kind of starting there. In addition to that, what are the tools that we can arm them to help solve customer challenges quicker? How can we help them guide customers through their journey and achieve better outcomes? So really kind of thinking about, time back to the employee, such as the CSM and adoption. And then second to that, like how can we help customers achieve outcomes and solve problems quicker?
So I think this is a great segue to kind of like, this is the sexy part. This is what everybody wanted to chat about, right? Everybody wanted to chat about, hey, what is the actual kind of like AI use cases, right? And I think I'm just going to say this again. You should not just AIFI everything because you can, right? One of the kind of like downstream impacts that we're seeing is like finances being hit with these massive bills, from all these kind of consumption costs, so on and so forth. If you can get to the same outcome leveraging a workflow, you should do that first. Like, your finance teams will thank you, all that type of stuff. In addition, we tend to think of use cases in kind of two different buckets. Like, there's GTM execution, right? Hey, is it running a play like, onboarding sequences or training adoption sequences, things like that with new customers, versus go-to-market operation. That's more kind of internal infrastructure. So, Austin, I know we were chatting about kind of a number of things that you guys have started to think about. I want to start with kind of the core one that you and I were kind of talking about, because, like, again, this is not going to be a sexy one, but like, this is, I think, where a lot of people are kind of missing this. One of the things that you mentioned to me when we were kind of prepping for this is you started to kind of like implement, make sure that all customer interactions are recorded, stored in one place. Walk me through kind of what that process, what it was like beforehand, where you're at now. Are you to the place you want to be? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this one sounds small, but it has a huge impact, in my opinion. So think about the number of calls your teams are on each and every day, and start with thinking about how they then prepare for those calls. So we've embraced a tool by the name of Gong as of this year. And one of the key benefits in doing that, it starts with the preparation for the call. So every morning now, moving forward, the CSMs and the adoption folks, they look at their calendar and they get a debrief of, here's the insights you need to know to prepare for your calls. those insights can be, here's what you discussed, here are the action items, here are the folks that were on the call, here were the command outcome commitments. So it helps prepare the team better for those calls. During the call, the days of taking notes, hopefully that's foreign to everybody on this call, but the transcript, the action items, the learnings from the call, the opportunities, all of that is tagged. And from a leadership perspective, I now have the opportunity to filter out keywords. So is there a competitor discussed in the meetings? And I can filter that out and get a report on that week over week. So it's helping, obtain better insights to calls. There's call scorings as well to see how effective those calls were. And it's really bringing a lot of value. And then lastly, following the call. So the days of meeting recaps, who's going to be the action item owner on the call, that's all populated for you. So it's giving time back in our day-to-day operations to say, hey, CSM, we're going to do this for you. After the call, immediately, I get a summarized action item list that I can then share with the customer and internal stakeholders. So it's been an awesome tool. Again, it sounds small, but this has been a huge asset from a performance and giving time back to the team and hopefully improving the customer experience as well.
I'm curious. So are you saving all that just inside of Gong, or is it also getting saved inside of your CRM as well?
It's inside our Salesforce as well, which is awesome. So any executive want to go see a call or review a call recording or see the notes of it, they can go into Salesforce and look at that as well.
And then from an executive level, particularly from your perspective, what's the type of I know here and there you may kind of pop in and see call by call, but at a more kind of macro level, what's the type of data you're trying to look at in terms of are you aggregating kind of sentiment score across multiple customers? Walk me through your dashboard. That's kind of the summary of a bunch of that kind of call recordings and notes.
Yeah. So some of the dashboards and what we're working towards eventually, we're trying to build a program around renewal readiness. And so as you have multiple calls with customers, you begin getting a health sentiment score based on the engagements, the email communications and the phone calls and the meetings we have. It creates an aggregate score. So that's one of the things that we're working towards to say, hey, leading into renewal based on the customer and the context we're talking to, what's your likelihood to renew? So that's a creative new thing that we're testing and playing with today. Second to that is this competitive analysis. So understanding when a competitor is mentioned, that's one of the things. And then second, we're in a large journey on converting customers to our cloud product. So how are those conversations going? What are we learning? What are the gaps? Those gaps are then avenues in which we can review with product week over week to say, hey, customer brought up A, B, and C. These are the three themes we're seeing to help us continue to improve our products.
So I just you just brought up three very distinct use cases that I think is phenomenal for any CS leader, right? So, the first one you kind of talked about the ability to kind of proactively measure your renewal percentage, right? And that's been one of the holy grail in RevOps and in the past pre-AI, you're trying to kind of do a bunch of Excel gymnastics and download data from a bunch of different spots to essentially say, hey, we got $1 million up for renewal. We've got sentiment scores of 80%. And that's awesome. And then you can then adjust your customer journey. So step two in this kind of process, based upon that, if all of a sudden you have less, the sentiment's not as high as you want. The second thing you brought up, which I thought was very kind of interesting, is your ability to kind of think about competitive battle cards. And so are you taking as competitors are popping up and then empowering, whether it's both sales and CS, to essentially say, hey, look, so-and-so is, the competitor, here's a battle card as they're talking. What are you doing with that information as you all are hearing about that?
It's a great question. And full transparency, I'm actually getting a report every Friday of the summary of when those names are mentioned. So it provides me a quick summary. Here were the themes. Here's what was discussed. Here were the topics of conversation. So it filters out that and kind of provides me an executive summary of here's what was discussed based on the competitive threat we've aligned on. From there, we have an interlock meeting every Thursday with product, in which we can review, here are the things we're learning. Here are the feature functionality gaps that we need to continue to evolve upon. So yeah, those are some of the things we're working on. To your point with battle cards, that's an opportunity, Reese. We have not got there yet. But thank you. I told you you're smarter than I am. So we need to get on with that and think about how we use that insights to better enable our teams.
Well, and what's cool about that, right, that also mentions kind of the third thing that you talked about is being able to kind of like you have a very kind of like bespoke use case of like you guys are switching a lot of customers from from one part of your product to another part of the product, but then being able to take all the insights from that conversation and power like beforehand, that was like such a manual lift, and now you have this great interaction not only with product but product marketing as well, to like, well, there's battle cards like, hey, this is what's going well, this isn't what's going well. So is product then taking those insights, and is that helping to inform their kind of product roadmap?
100%. We had a call this morning actually, and we're reviewing all the feature functionality week over week. And we are getting things done rather quick based on this sentiment feedback we're getting from meetings and and the general customer success conversations we're having. So it's helping for sure, and it's helping build and mature our products.
So what's interesting here, right? For everybody, we're talking about a very basic AI use case, right? What we're essentially talking about at the end of the day is like record all your meetings, right? Like, I know that sounds like wildly basic. You would be shocked how many organizations are not effectively doing this, right? And like, this isn't a GOM promo or whatever it is. Like, lots of tools do this. HubSpot I know does this, and they have it a part of it. You just got to connect your calendar, and then it'll associate everything either on the company record or the deal record, and then it'll send you a to-do afterwards. So like, you have a lot of versions of this, but like, I think the takeaway for everybody here is like, if you're like, this is the foundation from everything else you can kind of do moving forward. Of like, you need to have a single source of truth in terms of your interactions with your customers. And it starts by recording everything and then saving it in a central location. Like, Austin, like, how is this impacting like how you all are thinking about like expansion? And like, again, back to one of those metrics we want to track, which is, net revenue retention. Like, you talked a little bit about the renewal, but like, how is this impacting about like potential hand raisers of like, hey, this could be a good opportunity for us in the future to like grow our relationship together?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we're looking to become consistent in our tooling across the entire customer lifecycle. So that remains to be an opportunity. And what I mean by that is the pre-sales conversation, the implementation blueprinting conversation, the adoption conversation, the CS, all of that data then now sits in one consistent tool. And as more data is inputted, it makes it richer, it makes it better to help us achieve better outcomes for our customers. At times, because we're using different tools and different segments and different chapters of the customer journey, it becomes disjointed. So we're working with professional services. Sales is using the same tools as we are, but there's an opportunity for us to consolidate what we're using, so we have better insights to drive customer outcomes and be a bit more consistent and get more value out of the tooling we have invested in over time.
Love that. Looks like we got a question. Kevin, you got a question, sir?
Yeah, well, it's a question, but also a comment. So I think you're exactly what you're talking about in terms of having all of the data of the entire customer journey is like, there's a huge unlock there. And Austin, you're talking through the challenges of pulling the data from multiple systems and different systems changing. I mean, there's just many layers of complexity there. The way we've solved that is that we actually built, for every customer, we built a JSON where we're actually generating metadata out of the baseline systems.
That's awesome.
So that we, meaning the AI team, can control the quality of the data that the AI is then hitting. So rather than the AI, when interrogating the data, we're not interrogating the source systems, we're interrogating the JSON. And so if something changes or breaks, we can fix it. But basically, you get that consistent metadata layer with more control. So I'm just throwing that out there. If you're building this or thinking about building it, I think that was a really novel approach that I didn't come up with, but somebody else came up with that's really been it's been a sort of key component of everything that we've been doing. Because if you get that layer right, then you can develop a high degree of confidence in the data that you're pulling. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, that's awesome, Kevin. And I think part of kind of what you're saying is right, having that centralized set of data of like that you can go and kind of query and or it's out, it's either you can go pull data out of it or it'll push data out of it, but a central location of all the customer data that's showing up, not just post sales, but being able to have that like what were they talking about from pre-sales through the sales process into post sales. because it's making handoff better, making all of that type of stuff such a better experience. And I love how you solved that, like leveraging the JSON. And then what and how, I'm curious, just because this is a cool conversation. I'm like, how are you then querying that data?
Well, anytime the AI goes to look for information about the customer, it hits the JSON. So we have all the data centralized as well. So we took everything, we put it in the data. Then we have the metadata layer sitting sort of on top of it for the JSON. While we don't, occasionally we'll dip down into the main data set, 99% of the time we're just hitting the JSON.
The JSON.
Yeah, because it's just more controlled and we know what's there, and it eliminates a lot of confusion. Even if you build out the ontology and all the data mapping and do all the stuff, there's a lot of complexity, especially when you're talking about 5 different systems and all of that. And so it basically gives you a layer of I don't know if that's a word, but like uncomplicating the data into that cleaner version of the data. And then we always hit that. That's what basically everything, whenever we ask for what's going on with a customer, we hit the JSON.
Did you have, like, as you're hitting that kind of questions, was it like reoccurring kind of like agents, automations that are serving up data from that JSON on a regular basis? Or was it more manual, like, hey, I'm going to go pull data from this type of situation? Like, did you schedule? Yeah, go ahead.
It can do both, right? So you can do it as an ad hoc query. You can say, either way. It doesn't really matter. But that basically becomes the new data source for all things customer, and to your point, prospect. So when as soon as it hits the pipeline and that account's created in Salesforce, we build the JSON and start adding to it right then. Obviously, it'll either fall away and disappear, or it won't become a customer, or it does become a customer. Either way, you have that entire journey from the start.
Awesome.
And to that point there, right, for all the CS leaders who are kind of on the call right now, like making sure that pre-sales, your BDR folks, sales folks are following some sort of similar process where they're also recording the data, we're pulling it in, so we can then centralize all that data in one spot. And this just isn't a post-sales activity, which is great. So, Austin, I'm curious about this, like, as this conversation that we're having here, is sales at Command Alcon, are they recording stuff, and how has that kind of changed your kind of like handoff process from sales into the CS side?
Yes. So we have a process and tool by the name of Deal Ready. And we've implemented that over the last 2 to 3 quarters and continue to mature it. But in essence, what that is, it provides a high level summary. We call it handshake processes. So when sales goes to PS, in every jump within the chapter, we say it's a handshake. So there's a bit of knowledge transfer there. But Deal Ready has provided our professional services team a heightened level of insights on here's what was discussed, here are the challenges, here's what you need to know, professional services group, before you engage with the customer. So that's been a huge step. The second bit of that is we've recently implemented a tool by the name of Cursor. And as I mentioned earlier, we're in a journey of getting a number of our customers migrated to our new cloud solution. And so what Cursor does, it complements what we've learned from Deal Ready from a sales perspective, but it also provides our teams insights on their ecosystem, what they have today on-prem. So it's transformed how we've done customer discovery from install. A lot of you all probably use the term blueprinting when you kick off a project. It is elevated that substantially over the last 3 months. So the days of us going in asking 100 questions, we're not going into those meetings knowing those 100 questions, and rather being curious about them or validating our understanding.
And walk us through that process a little bit. And just for everybody here, like, that, this isn't kind of like a sales thing for Cursor or anything like that, but we're talking specifically, I think, about a use case where, like, how do you make onboarding, to your point, less reactive, where I'm going to ask you 100 questions, and much more proactive conversation? Like, I already know the information, so how can I have a much more thoughtful conversation? So, like, as you're leveraging Cursor, the client gets kind of access to this, they're dumping in a bunch of information. What does that process look like? So as we're thinking about use cases, people can take that away and it's like, hey, this is a use case you should go and set up, within their organization.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'm going to answer to the best of my ability, Reese. So give you an example, and I feel like all CS leaders have probably been in this position before, for better or worse. You go into a meeting with the customer, and the customer looks at you and says, listen, we told your sales team all of this. Why don't you know it? This is a waste of my time. And then you get an ad hoc call from that executive, like, we told you all this already, right? And so a big benefit of that is our teams are now going in with a level of confidence. It creates a level of trust from a customer's perspective, saying, wow, they actually listened. There's been some form of transition and handoff internally. And you're coming off more polished in front of the customer. And in doing that, that helps with the project kickoff. It helps for time to value because you're not recreating a bunch of unnecessary questions or vetting. And you can get on to hopefully executing the project with success and a quicker period and hopefully getting the customer to find value quicker as well.
And so it's interesting, right? As we're kind of tying together this whole conversation, right? Like you think about your customer journey. One of the big things in your guys' customer journey is like, hey, in order to have kind of a thoughtful onboarding experience, we need to have access to this 100 questions, whatever that is. But to kind of like make that a proactive, not a reactive conversation, the AI use case is like, hey, how do we take all that information that was done in the sales process, empower then the CSM with all that information so they're coming in asking more thoughtful questions. You all have chosen to do it via Cursor. And what's interesting is to Kevin's point here, right? Like by having a kind of like a JSON layer across that customer journey, like you had that, you could just query that from agents. So you can take the two different approaches, but it's still the same use case within that customer journey. What's been the experience from like the CSM perspective? Like where and how is this, like you mentioned earlier, like one of the ways that you're prioritizing AI is you're trying to save them time. Like what's been the perspective from the CSM perspective?
I think across the board, it's this time back in your day to do more proactive and productive activities as a baseline. Simple things, I say simple things, but it may sound crazy to think about why did the customer originally buy this? What were the problems we were solving? Not having to ask that question 2 to 3 times across the life cycle. Rather, you obtain those up top. That then goes into the project. That then comes into the adoption. And ultimately, hopefully, the renewal if you've achieved those outcomes with customers. So I think it's elevating the customer conversations we're now having because we know more. We're a bit more prepared. And I feel like our customers then have a bit more respect and trust in us because we have a full holistic picture of what they shared with us over time.
So we've talked about a handful of use cases here, right? Like, so we've talked about kind of like note capture and some of the insights that it can kind of serve up from not only renewal, renewal likelihood to product marketing and product, roadmap informing. We talked about the handshake process of like, how do we make that sales to kind of CS, hand off a much more kind of like seamless process. And then we've also talked about kind of like this onboarding experience of like, how do we come in and make sure that the CSM is kind of much more empowered? So it's a much more thoughtful, quicker time to value. As you're kind of, I know that's a lot, but like, as you're sitting there kind of looking at the next phase for your CSM organization, what are some of the other use cases that you're thinking about, you're working to implement? Where are you thinking, hey, we can go save this CS team, another, hour in their day here, right? Or something like that.
Yeah. So great question. I'm going to say this openly, honestly, like I'm passionate about customer success and the scope of AI and technology, in my opinion, I don't think will replace the modern day CSM. I feel when done right, it will elevate our skill set. It will help the professional be more successful in what they're doing. It will help us solve problems over time. So to me at the core, and I have to say this, like that human aspect of customer success management, that's forever. You can't replicate the handshake, the empathy, the understanding, the hey, I hear you customer with AI. And I encourage people to be cautious of that because it's important when you're building relationships. There's something a human does that AI can help but can't do directly. So to answer your question, how are we thinking about AI in the future? Directly, it's helping our customer success management org scale. And what I mean by that is how can AI, how can a tool help us touch more customers? How can we learn more about our customers and have better levels of engagement with our customers throughout the life cycle? And also cover more accounts. So I'm sure a lot of folks on this call, you all have programs of X amount of CSMs. And I'm curious if they cover all customers or they only cover your top customers, right? That's a common challenge as you manage your budget. So the opportunity I have is thinking, how can a tool help us provide more touch points across all customers eventually? And that's, you often hear like digital touch or scaled segment. That's really where the opportunity for us is, into the future.
But so love the comment on like, you can't replace the human, because I think we at Domestic are kind of seeing a lot of that. Like, I think there was this kind of reaction, I don't know, 6-12 months ago, where you saw a lot of like, particularly coming down from investors, like, oh, hey, we're just going to get rid of CS altogether, and this, AI is going to take care of it. And now you're kind of seeing the flip side of like, hey, we can't get rid of people, but how do we like drive efficiencies? You've actually built some of these like super efficient. So like, I know you're doing this now at Command Outcome, but in your previous role at Zoom, you were like servicing thousands and thousands of customers with a relatively small CS team. Like, what were some of the things you were doing to drive some of those efficiencies that you're also potentially looking to do at Command Outcome?
Yeah, so in the theme of scale, and again, what I mean by that is like, how can I have one offering that impacts a lot of customers and serves value for a lot of them? So some of the small things to consider if you aren't already are things like your community engagement. So how can customers connect? How can they collaborate? That's scale. That's serving your customers at scale. Another opportunity that we did both at Zoom and now we're doing at Command Alcon is a concept called monthly open office hours. And it's just that. We review high-level best practices, hear the latest and greatest features, but most importantly, it gives an atmosphere for customers to connect and collaborate and ask us questions. And that's gone a really long way. And lastly, from a product feature functionality perspective, how are customers consuming your technology? How are customers hopefully finding value in your latest and greatest innovation? We also do quarterly CS-led product webinars. So here's what you need to know. Here are the big hit moments from a product perspective that we want you to adopt and find value in. So a lot of one-to-many offerings that will complement the AI evolution over time.
Love that. What's interesting is one of the things that came up in kind of the last webinar series we had. So the last one we had, for anybody who wasn't here, was in around kind of sales, right? So I mentioned we've been doing the series marketing, sales, now CS. And, we had a VP of sales from Redvine, Bo, and Bo made a very interesting comment. His comment was essentially, he's been trying all these AI use cases, and he's found that some of the use cases are actually making his team, for lack of a better term, dumber, right? Where they lose that critical thinking. And because of that, in some of those scenarios, he's actually turned off or not intentionally done AI automation or augmentation because he wants to maintain the critical thinking within a deal. I'm curious, from a CS perspective, are there any kind of like AI use cases, automations, things that you have thought about, tried, where all of a sudden it's like, oh, that didn't go well because all of a sudden Johnny CSM is no longer critically thinking, and we want to maintain that kind of critical thinking within the kind of like customer experience?
Yeah, perhaps a strange response to that, Reese, but I think oftentimes we've seen it when you leverage AI. One example is just the automated communication that it can create. It doesn't feel authentic. And back to the relationship aspect, when you're especially talking to an upset customer or you're trying to solve something with the customer, they want to feel like they're engaging with a authentic culture and person. So being mindful of how and when you're using automation versus picking up the phone and calling them or getting on the plane and going to see a customer. Those are the important things, that we need to stay in check with in customer success to ensure we're staying authentic to the core role of customer success and just not automating everything.
Wait, you're saying people can actually use a telephone? Like,
it works. Yeah. It still works.
Well, so I'm curious, if you were, let's say you came into an organization, they were totally greenfield, right? You're head of customer success, came in an organization, totally greenfield, and you were to kind of like start this like AI journey, what would be the steps that you would take? Because, I know it's a little different whenever you step into something and they have, legacy processes, legacy tech, data is a certain way, so on and so forth. So a lot of the conversations you're having are kind of like you're fitting it in, and there's a little Frankenmustery. But if you're coming to an organization that new, right? Let's say that, somebody on here is like starting with an organization from the beginning, like what would be the steps you would take, particularly from an AI perspective? And like, what would be the first one or two things you would do?
It's a great question, and I'm making some notes because I want to make certain I answer it to the T. And I feel it starts with culture, and you got to check the culture around you within the organization, or collectively, is your leadership team or the folks that you have invested in and hired, are we ready to embrace AI and the next wave of technology? It's here, and you may have some naysayers, etc., but ensuring your leadership team, and there's a handful of champions across the organizations that are ready and excited to embrace the change. So it may sound weird, but I think that's important to review and consider. Is the culture of the organization ready to take on? And are we ready to make the needed investments to not get behind and stay ahead of the culture change or the technology advancements that we're in? The next thing is like understanding what are the problems. So what are the top 2 to 3 problems that I'm seeking to either improve or completely solve for from technology, and having some alignment across the entire organization. And I think that last bit of having the alignment of problems across the entire org is really important. So you're not simply, solving things. This is what sales is doing, but it's disjointed on the NRR targets and rates. So having consistent, focus areas and problems you're trying to solve for. And then lastly, based on those problems, like what are the outcomes? So is it improving your renewal rates? Is it improving your ability to create references as customers? Like what are those outcomes you're seeking to solve for, and having a good foundation on those understandings.
Love that. And I'm curious, like related, but like, are you getting any pressure? Because we're seeing this across a lot of organizations. Are you getting pressure from the board of like, hey, we got to be like XAI, like focused particularly on a CS or a post-sales perspective, like by end of, FY26 or anything like that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that to the T. I'll say that our CEO he's the best, and so is our ELT. And I think all of them have shared a passion around embracing AI. So back to the culture bit, I think it's important. However, we're being very wise on not rushing AI. And just transparently, there's been opportunities for me to make investments in AI-like tooling. And I've shared with my leader that, hey, man, we're not ready. And here's why. And that's heavily driven by the data readiness of the technology. So yes, there's excitement to embrace and explore and be creative with AI. With that excitement, we need to continue to ensure we're secure, we're doing the right things for the right reasons, and having some consistency and understanding of what we're using and what outcomes that can help drive for the business and our customers.
Love that. That's fantastic. So, I think here today, kind of like summarizing a bunch of stuff we talked about, right? Like for those who are looking to kind of step into AI, right? Like make sure you're kind of thinking about that kind of 4 steps of like making sure that your kind of strategy, process, tooling, systems are in a good place. You've kind of got that customer journey, external, internal map, some sort of AI council. And then as you're thinking about the AI use cases, right? I think Austin brought up a number of them, right? Starting with that recording, right? But making sure it's not just post-sales, but also the entire customer journey. And then you're saving it somewhere in some sort of central place. I think the second kind of use case that we had talked about is like, what is that handshake handoff, right? From sales into CS. And, whether you're using a specific tool or, hey, you've got like a centralized data layer, and then you're able to kind of query that to make sure that, and then what are the kind of key moments within that journey where you can actually position yourself a lot more kind of forward thinking. So like, Austin gave the great example of like onboarding, right? Instead of the 100 questions, hey, they're leveraging Cursor to have a more thoughtful conversation here. And I think the other themes that kind of Austin highlighted is on the CS side of like, how do you maintain that authenticity, that human experience within the kind of like, while AI is kind of helping to support, and what are you doing to help kind of scale the organization across? Austin, what I missed, what else you want to kind of like, as we're kind of like tying a bow in this, that like people should be thinking about, particularly from a CS perspective, and marrying that with kind of AI today?
I'm going to answer it kind of weird, Reese, but in the world of customer success, it's such a tight community. So embrace your peer group. Find out what they're doing, what they have struggled with or learned from. I have a good peer group and of CS leaders and adoption leaders over time. And, those that have been in CS, it is continuing to evolve. And this next wave with AI, it's going to be the next chapter, and it's going to continue to evolve. And then there's going to be a new chapter. So use your ecosystem of CS professionals and collaborate, share, and it's going to make the community of customer success professionals even better over time. So that would be my big takeaway. It's like, I certainly don't have it all figured out. And the collective peer group in CS, we're all navigating this next chapter together.
Could not agree with that more. Like, I feel like I learn something new every week. Yeah. Kevin brought up a great example. What they're doing, they're taking the much more kind of air traffic controller route versus kind of like tying together kind of like, disparate AI agents, and you're kind of seeing both approaches, and, love to kind of hear that. All right, team, like we've got, 8-ish minutes left here. Austin has obviously got some like great thoughts and expertise. What thoughts, comments, questions from the group? Would love to kind of hear any questions from the group here. By the way, for those who don't know me, I'm extraordinarily good at like waiting in awkward silence. So my internal team like absolutely hates it. So like I'm happy to kind of sit here and make this super awkward. All right. Well, for those of you like who can clearly see, Austin is, as I mentioned, one of the most thoughtful CS leaders I know. If you have questions in around something that we chatted about, and just you're eating lunch right now and not prepared to kind of chat about it, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to, somebody at Domestique's happy to jump on a call, or happy to kind of put you in touch with Austin. We've got all these kind of templates we kind of shared, happy to kind of provide any templates. This recording will be kind of up on our website, so if you want to watch again or anything like that, happy to do that. But with that, Austin, thank you so much. Truly appreciate the time and thoughts today. And we really appreciate everybody else who took the time out of the day to join us. And thank you all very much, and hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your Thursdays.